All righty, welcome everybody. Joya Goodrum with the McMinnville Chamber. Today we have Heather Richards. She's going to be talking to us about the 3 Mile Lane area plan and the innovation center that's going to go along Highway 18. We're super excited to hear about this. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Heather. Heather's our city planner, and she's got a presentation for us. And so take it away. And I will mute myself. And please, everybody mute yourselves. Oh, and if you have a question, type it in the chat, please, and I will monitor and ask those questions. Thank you.
I feel like I should be at Pavlov's dogs running to the door every time I hear the doorbell ring. Yes, so I'm Heather Richards. I'm the planning director. I had put together a presentation focused on the 3 Mile Lane area plan, but I will bring in information into that about the innovation center as well. I think that's a great idea. So the 3 Mile Lane area plan is something rolling through our public hearing process right now, and it's at the city council level, and there's been a couple of public hearings already, and city council is in a place where they want to get more information out to the community and hear more back from the community about the plan before they make a decision about it. It is an important decision for our community. So my goal today is to share information with you about the plan itself, and then how you can participate if you want to participate in that dialogue with City Council. I want to make sure that you get the information you need. So as we go through this, please ask questions and put them in the chat, and Joy will ask them of me. Okay, so I'm assuming you're seeing one slide at this point in time. Excellent. All right, so the 3 Mile Lane area is an area over here in the southeastern quadrant of McMinnville. It's about 1,340 acres of land. It's all inside the city limits. And we asked the question, how can this area best serve McMinnville now and into the future? And then, does the current comprehensive plan support that vision? And how does that future vision then impact the state and local transportation system? So those were the big questions we were asking. There's been some confusion about it. I've gotten a lot of testimony about, no, we don't want to bring that farmland into the city and develop it. And the first thing I want to just dispel is it's already in the city. So this is all land that's in the city limits. It's been in the city limits for many years, a couple of decades actually. And so it will develop. And the question is, how will it develop? That's what we're asking ourselves at this point. We're not talking about bringing any additional land into the city through this process. What's interesting about this is in a community where there's a lot of land constraints, so not much vacant land, there's actually a significant amount of vacant land in this area. So anywhere where you see gray is vacant land. So there's this big 200-acre area right here, which is just east of the hospital. And then if you think about just west of Comfort Suites and the suites of medical offices over in that area, there's a lot of vacant land there. And then there's this long, the Furo family owns this, but this I call a little Band-Aid patch right here that's vacant. And then over here, what we call number 12, this is the Cal Portland site. It doesn't have a lot of improvements on it. So we looked at that as a buildable site as well. And then a lot of vacancy up here by the gateway. So our question was, there's a lot of opportunity here to serve the city in terms of future needs, especially since we didn't have a lot of vacant land in the city. And what should it be? So in 2017, we applied for a transportation growth management grant from the state. That grant comes through ODOT. So that's the other piece. That's the other question I get a lot is, does ODOT support this project? And yes, ODOT supports the project. They funded it, and they also managed the actual work to put it together. So we applied for a grant. It was about $275,000 that we got as a grant, and we did an in-kind match with about $8,000 in staff time. So great leverage for the city of McMinnville to bring that money to our community. We then worked with a project advisory committee that worked with a consultant team and ODOT representatives over the course of about 2 years, working on what's considered a preferred land use vision for the area. And then at the same time, ODOT was updating what they call their transportation model for the city of McMinnville so that we could then do a transportation analysis that would be as accurate as possible. And in 2020 and 2021, the consultant team worked with ODOT staff on that transportation analysis. And then both efforts resulted in this 3 Mile Lane area plan. The documents themselves, there's one plan document, and then there's 5 appendices. The appendices inform the plan. And we did a transportation analysis as part of this work. We did a market analysis as part of this work. We did an economic development analysis and design and development standards for that area. The plan itself is only 50 pages long, and so it's not a long document. It's fairly easy to read. So I encourage a lot of people that we hear from, read the plan. There's a lot of information in the community. Some of it's misinformed. And it's a pretty easy document to pick up and read. So if you really have questions, a lot of the answers you will find in there. And that document was developed over 3 years by this volunteer project advisory committee. They did design charrettes, public open houses, town halls, and then they submitted it to the planning commission, who reviewed it in early 2022. And now it's recommended to the city council for approval. So that's where we're at. There's a comprehensive plan text amendment that's also recommended. And what you just need to know about that is that adopting this plan does not actually change the comprehensive plan map. It doesn't change the zoning map, and it doesn't change the transportation system plan. What it does do is it establishes a vision for the area. It adopts guiding principles for development and an implementation plan for the appropriate code amendments that we need to put together to support the vision. So an area plan is a community vision, and it's developed by community members, and it's a very high level planning document to provide guidance to other more specific planning processes, such as our public utility plans, which we're updating all of those over the next couple of years, our parks and open space plans, etc. And then this plan was literally drawn by community members. So we brought in the concept of design charrettes to McMinnville to talk about this area, put maps on tables, and just told people, what do you want to see happen here? Here's some markers, start talking, start drawing, talk about opportunities and constraints, and let's see what comes out of this process. There are 5 goals in this plan. One is to support the district's economic vitality and marketability. Another one is to make sure there's opportunities to connect all these. There's a lot of diverse land uses out there. There's residential, there's industrial, there's medical, there's commercial, and there's tourism. So how do we connect all those different land uses together in a comprehensive way? Look at multimodal connections throughout the district. So this is a district that's really sort of almost cut off from the rest of the city, or you have to cross over Yamhill River Bridge to get into the rest of the city. It isn't an easy bike ped crossing on that bridge. So how can we look at better connectivity for people on both walking and biking? We also wanted to make sure it was that development was aesthetically pleasing. It's a gateway. More people see McMinnville on going through McMinnville on Highway 18 than in any other way. And we want to make sure that we're putting our best face forward. And then we also wanted to make sure we were improving the area for both existing and future residents that live there. This is the overall land use vision that came out of that effort. So all those maps that were drawn. And it really looks at what are our needs. So moving forward, our needs were both employment and housing. And so we talked about how can we bring that into this area. So you'll see anywhere that's pink or yellow is meant to be housing. Pink is high density housing, yellow is lower density housing. We took some of that vacant land that's over here that's on that, that western side of the Comfort Suites I talked about and said this is a great area for high density housing and some neighborhood serving commercial right on the frontage road along here that's Cumulus Avenue. And then we looked at employment opportunities in that 200-acre site that's right here, which would be the innovation center that Joya was talking about, and I'll go through that a little bit more. And then there's a retail site identified here. This comes right off of the intersection that exists today where you stop for a light to turn into the Evergreen Aviation Campus. And then that site that I said was industrial and not much improvements on it. Over on this northern side, we said that's another great site for high density residential and neighborhood serving commercial, because it actually has a beautiful view that looks over into the river in that area. We wanted to make sure everything was walkable. So wherever you see these dotted lines, those are trails, suggested trails and connectivity that connect everybody to the different types of amenities. And then we have Airport Park right back here. So this innovation center is meant to be kind of like a campus for industrial development and entrepreneurs, and built out like a campus. So it doesn't just look like an industrial park where you drive to your particular parcel and lot and go into your building. This is really meant to interact with each other and create connectivity to this airport park here and to the commercial amenities here, and potentially mixed use housing and other amenities on this side as well. And then more importantly, or just as importantly, I guess I would say, it has adjacency to the airport. So this area is the airport right here. And it's a great opportunity for businesses to take advantage of the airport's proximity in terms of what they do. We also looked at transportation. It is a state highway. It operates as an expressway. We want to make sure it continues to operate as an expressway. And there's also local transportation in this area. So this is the transportation plan that's recommended for this. This is a 20-year planning horizon. So we looked from 2021 to 2041, how this land would serve the community for the next 20 years. And that's building towards a population of about 45,000 people. This transportation plan doesn't add any new amenities. These signals both already exist out there, except for a new amenity right here, which is at Cirrus Avenue. And that's based on shutting down all the local access points that are along here. So you have Loop Road over here, and you have, I think it's Heather, I actually know this, right? Heather or Laurel Lane right here. And so what we want to do is shut down all those local access points and a controlled intersection at Cirrus for safety measures. And that's been recommended to be a roundabout or a signal. It has not been determined yet. That will need to go through a review at ODOT with the freight group to see which is a better amenity for that intersection. And then there's also a planned signal here at First and 3 Mile Lane. That's currently in our TSP. It's warranted based on when the traffic gets high enough for it. And that in this 20-year planning horizon, we see that happening. So this plan does not change the classification of Highway 18. It still operates as a bypass and an expressway and a freight route. It meets all of the state adopted mobility standards for their system. It follows our 1996 Oregon Highway 18 corridor refinement plan. It follows our TSP as well. And really the focus becomes building out these frontage roads that don't exist along both the north and south sides. And the reason for that is to get the local traffic off of Highway 18 and traveling along the frontage roads to all the amenities there. So that's the nutshell. Now to talk about the details. How is the plan developed? I think it's important for people to understand this. This was a community planning process. So it's a public process that starts at the very beginning because the community is putting this plan together. So over the last 3 years, we had about hundreds of hours of community volunteer time, providing their input, making decisions that inform the plan. We had hundreds of hours of technical expertise that refined those plans that the community volunteers put together. So, they were putting down all their dreams and visions. And then we had the technical experts saying, this is how we can make that work. We refined those ideas by taking them out into public open houses and town halls and surveys. So we went out to the community and said, does this make sense to you? And then we presented it to the Planning Commission. We're in a public hearing process right now at the Planning Commission and City Council. And typically that's where we start our public process when we have land use applications. But this is very different. The public process happens so much earlier in this time frame. And I want to make sure we don't lose track of that, because this was both the consultants and the ODOT representatives who worked on this project felt it was one of the better public processes that they've seen in terms of putting this type of plan together. We started in 2017 in the summer. We invited a class from the University of Oregon into McMinnville, and we did a full day design charrette over at the Evergreen Aviation Museum. And that's when we really started the discussion of let's draw our dream. I think, Joy, I saw your name on this, so I think you participated at this. It's fun to go back and see all these things. But we had about 60 people there in terms of spending that day drawing on maps. And then we presented them to each other to see what the ideas were that came out of that process. And these are all the people who participated in that design charrette. Out of that process, we identified priorities. This came out of that whole Green Cities project. The overall highest scoring topics focused on employment, land use flexibility, and diversity. So making sure the employment lands can be reactive and responsive, and do what they need to do, right? Perform, bring those valued jobs to our community. It also looked at multimodal mobility and connectivity, and then that 3 mile lane sense of place. The number one priority in terms of the different projects was to develop new commercial spaces along 3 mile lane, i.e. gas station, grocery, and retail. And then there was also a strong second in terms of provide services and amenities on the east side of the bridge, office space for higher wage jobs and traded sector jobs. So that information then informed the TGM grant process. And like I said, that was developed by a project advisory committee. Here are the members who served on that committee for 3 years. And they are the ones who really shepherd this plan through the process and made the decisions as we were working through gathering all the data and what the community was telling us. They also did the design charrettes and started drawing on paper. And then we also had a meeting with property owners. So there are 2 properties right here. They're each about 100 acres each. They equal about 200 acres of vacant land. It's very unusual to have a 200-acre parcel that has just 2 owners. And so what that means is they have a lot of influence over how that property moves forward, right? Because it's private property rights. What we wanted to do is get in front of them and say, hey, are you willing to have this discussion about what's best for the community and participate in this in terms of, are you supportive of moving your property forward in the way the community wants it to move forward? So we brought them together into a room. They hadn't actually ever met each other and started having those discussions and spent the day together talking about that. Out of that, there were 3 different versions of what that property could do to serve the community interests. And that was based on all the things that happened prior to that we brought to them. And they had agreements put together on how they would move forward in partnership to support the community's interests. We then put all of this together and went out and did a public open house and put a survey out and asked people for their comments and suggestions, and then did a town hall and charrette as well. So we were always going back and refining the design and letting people continue to draw on those maps. The research that informed the plan, we did a market analysis. We hired a consultant that did a market analysis for us because we wanted to understand, what would the market respond to in terms of our needs. So housing is a no-brainer for McMinnville. We know there's a need for housing in McMinnville. And so we wanted to understand just how much that was and how much we could place in this area and what type of housing. And it came back to show us that high density housing, especially on the southern side, was in demand and would be a great place for it. We also looked at retail spending. So we looked at leakage reports, and we were all surprised when this came back to us. So everything in blue is what's spent in McMinnville, and red is what's leaking out of McMinnville. So we have about $97 million a year. This was done in 2018, by the way. We have about $97 million a year that was leaking out in general merchandise. We had about 35 million that was leaking out in clothing and accessories. And then what surprised us was this 30 million that was leaking out in terms of food and drinking places, so restaurants. So if you have kids, I have kids, so I can only think from my lens. None of this surprised me because we're not finding those needs here in McMinnville. So I know me and my cohorts are, shopping other places to get that for our families. This piece surprised me, and it made me think that maybe people are taking a full day away to go on a shopping trip to Salem or the Tigard area, and then are going out to eat as a family. And maybe that's where that's coming from. We looked at office market and it showed that it was tight, meaning that there was opportunities there and that rents were going up. And this whole plan, at the time we were doing this plan, something else was happening in McMinnville. We had two businesses that had outgrown their spaces downtown and they wanted to stay in McMinnville, but we couldn't find office space for them to stay at. So one was TTR Software and the other was In Springs Living. And so they were looking to leave the community and take all those jobs with them. And so we really scrambled to find a place for them to be. And we found them, we were able to get them into the buildings that were built by the Evergreen Group that's on the south side of the highway that had gone into bankruptcy. And they had been previously thought of as industrial, but we were like, this works for office space. It works in our zone. Let's put them there. They love being there and we love having them in McMinnville, but it pointed out to us that we didn't have large Class A office space available for our growing businesses that wanted to stay there. So that was one of our needs. The other thing that was starting to really grow at this time, and we've seen the statistics that continue to grow through COVID, is tourism and spending associated with that. So the development mix that came out of the market analysis was residential in terms of townhomes and garden apartments, having some sort of grocery anchored and or mid to large format retail with specialty, experiential retail, so the experience that you're looking for, and have it tied to the wine industry, low-rise office space, craft industrial, mixed-use commercial, and then lodging and hospitality. At the same time, we did an economic development analysis and said on the 200 acres of the land that's vacant, that's in the industrial zone, what's the best way to leverage that? Our goal was high density, high wage jobs. So what's the best way to leverage that land to achieve that goal? And so we came up with 3 concepts for it, and we had a high scenario and low scenario. The interesting thing to look here is there's a lot of discussion about commercial jobs versus industrial jobs. The thing about industrial jobs is they have a pretty wide swing. So you can have an industrial user that uses a lot of square footage space, but doesn't create a lot of jobs. That's warehousing. We have cannabis growers in our industrial lands that fall into that category too. Or you can have an industrial user that has high density jobs. And so, that's the wide swing of it. And then there's also a wide swing in wages as well in industrial. Retail is fairly consistent. And so through this process, the discussion was, should we do a little bit of retail and then the rest industrial so we can have that sort of stability of jobs and respond to the retail need that we were seeing in leakage, and move that forward in terms of and then try to attract high density jobs in this innovation center area. At the same time, we also knew that the cost for improving this intersection here, so that's again that intersection where you pull into the Evergreen museums, is going to be fairly expensive. It's not improved yet. And we've had a lot of industrial users look at that property and they haven't been able to make it work because the costs to develop it are just too high. And so the thought process there was, if we put some commercial development here, it will be able to pay for that infrastructure, stimulate the, bring it to and through, that's what we call it. So build the roads, put the pipes in the ground, which would then stimulate the industrial development behind it and then respond to that retail leakage need. But these are the 3 scenarios. We put some residential in there. We were asked to look at residential. So we put some residential over here closer to the hospital, thinking, there might be an opportunity for some of that transitional rooms that you see where the hospitals are getting into more outpatient work. And then we also entertained the notion of putting it along here down by the river, overlooking the river. We eliminated this residential right away because we agreed that we did not want to develop housing right next to the airport. That's a conflict in and of itself. And so that was a concept that immediately went away. And then we started looking at the other 2. We also looked at design and development. We just adopted these great neighborhood principles. And we said, okay, so this is the value system for the city. We want to preserve natural features, have scenic views, all this sort of stuff. What does it mean for this specific area? And what are the principles to achieve those great neighborhood principles in this area itself? And we put all that together, which is what you see here. We have a baker's dozen of great neighborhood principles. There's some things in here. Let's see if I can pull something out. Design simple roof forms, industrial and agricultural, so that the height and distinctive forms of silos can be inspiration that's happening out there. We had a lot of discussion about this existing built environment and how do we replicate that or build off of it, I guess, because that's McMinnville. So with all that said and done, then the consultants started putting together everything they were seeing and hearing and the maps that people were drawing. And we came up with several different land use concepts. This is land use concept 1. And you'll see the industrials down here, the retail site is right here, and then you have mixed use and some high density residential. This is concept 2, which takes that retail site and makes it bigger. And looks at a corporate campus, so no longer this sort of industrial campus, but a corporate campus, and puts a little bit more high density residential, this little piece right here, reflecting that one economic development concept we saw. And then here's the third one, which had that residential down here along the Yamhill River. So the group looked at all that. The project advisory committee said none of those actually work for what we think should happen here. We think it's a hybrid of all of them. So they started mashing them around and they came up with this as their preferred land use vision, which carries the retail site, has the innovation campus, has an opportunity for mixed use if there's need for residential down here, but really focuses the high density residential over in this area and the tourism commercial over here. So the big elements of this is a walkable mixed-use town center. That's the retail site right here. It's spelled out in the plan what this should look like and feel like. The project advisory committee was very intentional that they wanted this not to be sort of a generic big box space. They really wanted it to be something that was specific and unique for McMinnville, that met the retail needs for McMinnville, but also said to those people driving down the highway, this is a very special place. So how it was built and designed was important, and that also it supported local businesses and entrepreneurs. So these are some examples of that. And this is the project advisory committee said it's a gateway location. It needs to be well designed. They developed what they call the 3 Mile Lane Area Plan Recommended Design booklet that has these standards that reflect McMinnville-ness. They spent some time talking about what McMinnville-ness is. Which I thought was interesting. And then they also thought it was important to have connectivity to this site. So trails from that south side, high density housing that's towards the east, adjacency to the innovation center, local frontage road access and highway access. The other big piece of the plan is this innovation center. So that's the jobs piece of this. We really want to see this industrial land's been vacant for 40 years. It hasn't been developed. We really want to see this move forward with the development. We don't have a lot of industrial land left in the city. This is really sort of what I would describe as the next generation legacy project for McMinnville. And it's taking a lot of traction because at the same time, the state's talking about innovation hubs as well. And this is really where we start to see that entrepreneurial spirit come alive and where these businesses can all work together in terms of research and development and flex space and really see these businesses grow in the McMinnville way. And that's 160 acres. It's very large for that type of effort. We're looking for entrepreneurial industrial businesses. We're looking for research and development, education's a big piece of this, supportive services, manufacturing space, designed like a campus with adjacency to the airport for those corporate interests and aviation businesses, and then the parks and open space for employee wellness and connectivity. Businesses are looking for this now. They want to be able to serve their employees in that way. And then the third big piece of the plan are these 2 mixed use neighborhoods here on the eastern side, both on the north and or western side, both on the north and south. And that's looking at high density residential and neighborhood serving commercials. So often residential over these commercial pads with local street grids, pedestrian oriented buildings, trail connectivity, and natural features incorporated, especially on the north side. There's great ravines there that should be highlighted as great scenic views. So we asked ourselves the question, once the land use vision was realized, does our comprehensive plan support it? So you can't develop it if the comprehensive plan doesn't support it. And that was the whole purpose of this effort. And so looking at our comprehensive plan, this is the existing plan, blues industrial, reds commercial, yellows housing. We saw 3 areas where we thought the comprehensive plan needed to be amended to support that vision. And these would be the amendments that would need to take place. That equates to about 70 some odd acres in total. Of that 1,340 acres, it's about a 6% change in the overall acreage in terms of the use. So not a lot of amendments really in the grand scheme of things. Then we did a transportation analysis. The transportation analysis, it's a ZODOT project. So a lot of transportation modeling. We spent years on this part of it. They updated the McMinnville transportation model. They brought Lafayette and Dayton into their model. They brought the state system into the model. They then looked at existing conditions in 2017. They put into the model how much, what would happen as the population grows to 45,000 by 2041. We removed urban growth boundary lands that were in the previous model that were never approved. That's that long sort of challenge that happened in the court system that was not successful. And then we assumed full build out by 2041. So that's the modeling process. To understand transportation, I think this is a great graph. There's a lot of discussion about the mobility of Highway 18. So roads retain mobility, meaning you can get through them fairly quickly and easily when you have less access and speed occurring. So as more access points, driveways occur on a road, typically you have less and less mobility because you're slowing down for all that activity. So highways and expressways, which is what Highway 18 is right down here. It's the second highest mobility standard. Freeways are the highest. That's your interstates. That's like I-84 and I-5. The state highway plan and Highway 18 is governed by that. There's been a lot of questions as to, does this meet the state highway plan? Does it destroy the bypass? All this other stuff. Highway 18 is an expressway in the state highway plan. That's right here. And we talk about managing the mobility through what we call these numbers right here, which is our V over C ratio. And I'll explain that to you. But what's important to know is it's a 0.80 at each intersection on the highway. And that describes the maximum V over C ratio that we would accept to continue the mobility of an expressway. V over C ratio is volume to capacity. So really what it means is how much capacity that intersection has in terms of the number of cars traveling through it at a certain time. It's based on a percentage of 100% capacity. So 0.80 is 80% capacity. And what we call level of service C is the threshold. So that's as far as we'll allow things to go based on that state highway plan. So here's our marker for Highway 18. When we get below that, that's when we need to make improvements on the highway to make sure we can get back up to this area in here. So our existing system, after we updated the model, in the existing conditions that were 2018, the 2 intersections out on the highway were operating at what we call B level of service. So 0.62 and 0.56 out of this 0.80 target. When we put in all the build out occurring to 2041 existing lands as zoned today at the peak hour, so that's the rush hour, we discovered that based on the model, Oregon 18 and Norton Lane will change to 0.74, so still operates under this 0.80, and Cumulus will change to 0.63, so still operating under 0.80. So what that means is this is going to happen anyways, regardless if the area plan is adopted or not. This is where we're going, but it still operates under that threshold, so no new transportation improvements are needed. If we did the proposed comprehend plan amendments that we talked about, so the area plans adopted and we changed the area plan, they increase by 0.02 and 0.01 respectively. So Norton Lane goes to 0.76 and Cumulus Avenue goes to 0.64. Without the area plan, they're 0.74 and 0.63. With it, they're 0.76 and 0.64. It's not a lot of difference, and people have struggled with that. The reason for that is in the grand scheme of things and what's happening out there and how big that area is, this orange line right here is the change in vehicle trips associated with those changes. This right here is the change based on just if it builds out to 2041. So not a lot is happening in that regard. So it still performs at that mobility standard. If it goes over 0.80, so let's pretend that the analysis came back and said this intersection will be 0.84, then we need to think about, okay, what other improvements do we need to build to take cars off the Highway 18 in that intersection so it gets back down below 0.80. And that's how the system is managed. Oh, and this shows that preferred land use vision that I just pointed out to you. So protecting the system, there's been a lot of dialogue of, this is forecasting 20 years. How do we know? It's forecasting. Forecasting is not a perfect science. And so there's a lot of checkpoints along the way in terms of when development occurs. We're in the big picture place right now, the 30,000 foot level. We're talking about a comprehensive plan amendment and a 20-year planning horizon. So that's what we're doing right now. When somebody comes in and wants to rezone their property, that's going down to the 15,000 foot level. We now understand if it's a commercial comprehensive plan designation, they have 3 commercial zones that they can choose, C1, C2, C3. They all have different uses and impacts. They choose a zone, and then we can refine the analysis. They have to do another traffic impact analysis. We can go through that whole process again. If there's significant effect, meaning their development or their rezone pushes that 0.80 above the 0.80, that intersection above 0.80, then we have to look at what we call mitigation measures to get it back underneath. So what's the transportation improvements they need to build to get back down? And then when they come in for their development plan, then we know exactly what they're going to build, and we do another traffic impact analysis. And we do the same thing. We're managing the system in terms of what's the effect and what are the mitigation measures. And we means it's both the city and the state that are doing that work. For those things that are impacting Highway 18. The state is governed by 2 state adopted laws in terms of how they do that. And the city's governed by our transportation system plan. So there's been a lot of discussion about Highway 18 corridor refinement plan. This doesn't match it. It blows it up, all these other things. It actually is following the Highway 18 corridor refinement plan. It was adopted in 1996. That plan identified 3 phases of improvements out on Highway 18 as the community grew and vehicle congestion grew on the highway system. And it has the same standard of the 0.80 VC ratio. So it says, when you get to a place where you're no longer achieving 0.80, move to the next phase of improvements that are in this plan. It also says in the plan that both phase 1 and 2 can be segmented into components, that it relies on that improvements being in the LOS of C, and that depending, and you defer to when those improvements are needed based on development as it occurs. So this is the corridor refinement plan. This is phase 1. You'll see that there's a signal here, there's a signal here, and then there's some planned frontage roads along here. We're in phase 1 today. And we expect we'll still stay in phase 1 with this area plan over the next 20 years based on our analysis. Phase 2 builds an overpass here at Cumulus. So again, that's the intersection where you go to the Evergreen site. It eliminates the signal here. So you no longer can pull off the highway at Norton Lane, so into the hospital or into coming attractions and McDonald's. You can't pull off the lane there. You go through, you'll have to pull off here and get on the frontage roads. This is a pedestrian bridge. And then all these frontage roads are built with signals along the way. That's phase 2. That's a pretty significant improvement. And we don't expect to be at phase 2 for, ODOT's thinking 35 years maybe, in terms of our growth and needs. And then the last phase is putting even more frontage roads on the system and putting more signals along here. The reason a lot of people ask, why is the phasing pushed out so long? It's because when this was put together in 96, they assumed that McMinnville would have grown considerably in terms of its urban growth boundary. So everything in a color is what the assumption was. Everything in red is what our current urban growth boundary is. And that we would have a lot more commercial out here. So everything that's white is commercial development. So that's not happening, all those additional pieces at this point in time. In the transportation system plan, we don't have the overpass. We never anticipated it to need to happen within our current transportation system plan. we talk about this intersection and building the frontage roads. And then this is the overall improvements that are discussed in the area plan and what's needed to fund them. They're the same improvements that are in the transportation system plan, except we've added the Cirrus Avenue one here. And then this right here is an improvement that we will be working towards, which is rehabbing this interchange so that you can get off of it and go into McMinnville without having to come all the way down here, turning on to this intersection and coming back. So again, you're trying to get trips off the road and getting where they need to go. So the commercial rezone, let me see, okay. It's just doing time check. This is the controversial and probably the conversation piece that has generated the most interest. And just to let everyone know, this isn't to scale. This is identified in the plan as a 33-acre site with the public right-of-way taken out of it. It also identifies in the plan keeping land for that future interchange, even though it's not needed for 30 some odd years. Keep the land so we don't have to buy buildings that are built on the land when we do need to build it. And then surround that land with the industrial development. So in terms of large format retail, the plan actually does not recommend large format retail on this commercial site. It only identifies large format retail once, and that's in that market analysis that I told you about. But the project advisory committee said, we really want this to be a mixed use town center, not a big box site. And it also doesn't talk about big box stores, except for the fact that they're allowed in our C3 zone. What it does recommend is this mixed use town center. And it even draws out what that will look like with an anchor store and then this sort of like grid pattern with building frontage and smaller businesses on that building frontage. It describes it as a town center with gathering spaces, walkable streets, more dining options than typical strip suburban developments, and also the interest in grocery store and restaurants there. So why is it part of the plan? In the public process, as I showed you, it was identified as one of the #1 priorities that came out of the community discussion. So the need for more commercial opportunities in McMinnville. We had just adopted a policy in our UGB process where we said, instead of expanding the UGB by 40 acres, we'll rezone some of our industrial land to commercial land, so we don't have to expand the UGB by that much. We call that land use efficiency. There's a community need demonstrated in terms of that retail leakage. So people are driving to other places to get provisions. And so, you know, in planning, we like to make those available to people in the community in which they live.
Heather, I have a question.
Yeah.
So what does that leakage mean to our economic vitality of our community? I mean, how much money did you say leaks out every year?
Oh, I don't know the total number. It's got to be close to 200 million because there's like 140. I could get the total number. Let's say it's 150 million to be conservative.
Okay, so
those are dollars leaving the community.
So $150 million is leaving our community and going elsewhere instead of staying in our community.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And the problem with that is if I'm physically going somewhere and spending money to buy X, I could also be buying Y and Z there rather than in McMinnville as well. So it's pulling more dollars too. It's got like this multiplier effect.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted you. It popped into my mind and
No, that's fine.
Thank you.
The other thing to keep in mind for this area is there's lots of residential and there's no grocery store over here. So we heard a lot from the residents in this area that, you know, we have to get in our car, drive over the Yamhill River Bridge and go seek out a grocery store somewhere. And usually we like to have the grocery stores in closer proximity to our housing. And then also in this area, you have a lot of lower income housing. So we have a couple of subdivisions. This is where Habitat is and community home builders and housing authorities building an apartment complex. And those people aren't always mobile with vehicles. And so we wanted them to have access to groceries and provisions in a way where they could walk or ride a bike to it. And then industrial development, I shared with you that the infrastructure improvements to bring industrial to this 200-acre site is very expensive. And the commercial development could carry more costs than industrial would. So they would fund those improvements. This is shows our land use efficiency. So in 2020, we adopted an ordinance, amended our UGB, and we amended our comprehensive plan to put a policy in there to show the state how we were meeting our commercial land needs. So we showed a need of 106 acres for commercial land and 46 acres of industrial land with surplus. And so we expanded UGB by 66 acres for commercial land. And we said 40 acres will keep in the city and rezone 40 acres of industrial land to that. And we wrote a comprehensive plan policy stating that. That's in our policy statement today. And then these show just different types of comments from the surveys that we saw where people were talking about wanting more retail and opportunities. We also got out, so when we are in a public hearing process and we're looking out and seeing everyone who's testifying, they look very similar. So they're of similar demographics and household incomes and things of that nature. And so we feel like we're not always reaching our whole community. We have about 13,000 households in McMinnville. And so we wanted to get out a little bit further. So we went out into the parks programs and we put things in the community center and the library and said, what do you want to see in McMinnville when we were going through this process? And we got a lot of comments in that way. And those comments showed interest in more commercial options as well. And then here, Joy, I never added all these up. I'm sure it's in the study. I should know that, but this is the leakage. Friends of Yamhill County has said that there's no retail leakage occurring. We actually have we're actually doing very well in terms of our annual retail sales per capita, which is true. We call that the pull factor, which means per capita, this much money is being spent in McMinnville at our retail businesses. When you have a tourism market, that's contributing to that. So that makes some sense to us, but it doesn't talk about the sales gap analysis. So that's the specific leakage that's occurring. And our analysis shows that as well. So our existing businesses are healthy, which is good, but we still have retail gaps occurring, which is creating leakage. Yeah.
We have a question in the chat. The question is a gas station being figured in there too with all the new homes and businesses? We could use a gas station, I'm just saying, and a grocery store, but you know that, I've told you that before.
So that is a great question. Right now, it would be considered in here. It would not be considered in the neighborhood serving commercial sites, which were the two other comprehensive plan amendments. Those types of land uses allowed in that area would not be a gas station. And yes, everyone has asked for that. Restaurants, grocery store, gas station. So the public testimony concerns is that is a big box retail and large format retail. A lot of concern about bringing that into McMinnville. A lot of discussion about not needing that in McMinnville. And the plan doesn't actually recommend that either. And there's opportunities to use the plan. The plan itself has proposed design and development standards. So that's our code and regulatory framework. So if we adopt those codes, it says a development has to build into those design and development standards. That's kind of our law of development. And so that's where we have the opportunity to say, this is what the city, the community wants and values, and you developer have to build to this standard. If we don't have that, they can build what they want. There's been discussion of loss of high wage jobs. I walked you through that economic development analysis. What we feel is that if we're really focused on this as an innovation campus and are able to offset the public improvements, we can focus on high density, high paying jobs there. And that employment land planning is not always about just the wages. Retail needs for your community is also part of the discussion. And then there's been concern about congestion on Highway 18. And right now the science doesn't support that. So we've pushed on the analysis quite a bit in terms of the transportation analysis, and it just doesn't support that at this time. We looked at a couple of other developments in Oregon for those design development standards, like what are they doing that we really like in terms of design and development. There's been a lot of discussion of we aren't a Renko and Old Mill district. We're not trying to replicate them. We just said, what do they do really well that we think we should do here? And then we wrote recommendations for principles of the design standards for that retail site based on that. Some of those look at encouraging mixed uses whenever feasible, buffer the development on Highway 18 edge. It's got a great, nice vista as you drive through it with those grapes on the northern side by the Evergreen campus. We like that. We wanted to keep that. Landscape buffers, protective views. There's great views in that corridor of 3 different mountains. Look at regionally inspired architecture so that it's local. And all these other types of things in terms of how it's developed. And again, focusing on this historic grain silo and playing off of that.
Heather, we have a couple of questions.
Okay.
One of the questions was, isn't a gas station already allowed in the area zoned for tourist commercial by Old Stone Village? I know that I've talked to the owner of Old Stone Village and he considered putting in a gas station and then he abandoned that idea. So,
Yeah. So there is, what's funny about that area over there is McMinnville works from plan developments, which are site plans, and we lock them into ordinances, and that's the only thing that can be built on that land unless we change it. So back in the 70s, there was what's called the Airport Rendezvous Plan Development, which included that land over there. And it talks about exactly what can be built on that land. I do think a gas station is included in that.
Mhm.
I'd have to look at that.
But the owner of that property would have to do that, right? I mean, that would be his choice to
Or
put
sell
something in there.
Sell it to do it. Here's the problem. This is why a couple of people looked at it and walked away. Again, the transportation improvements necessary for the access off the highway. So that's going to attract a lot of trips in and out. They really have to improve the highway, and the plan, that 1996 plan says shut down that access point. So their improvement would be a frontage road all the way to Cumulus Avenue intersection.
Oh, that would be expensive.
Yeah.
$1 million a mile at least. Okay, another question. How much of the retail leakage is or was related to the pandemic? For example, a lot of people are probably ordering things online instead of using a local business. But the dates of that data, my recollection is we were talking about this before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
So
Yeah.
that data is prior to the pandemic. And then I also had a question at the city council level as to what does it look like now and how much of it is online.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to invest in what it looks like right now. Those analyses are about $55,000. It's based on credit card data. They know more about us than we think they know in terms of our spending habits. But I am going to go back to them and see if they have information they can provide me on terms of how much of it reflects online shopping. They can't give me exact, like people are shopping at Amazon and stuff like that, but they can give me aggregate numbers.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. Very good questions from those two folks.
Those are great questions.
We've got just about 5 minutes, Heather.
So what I want to leave people with is that there's a bunch of stuff in the plan that talks about design and development standards and what would need to take place for anything that's developed out there. One recommendation is anything over 10 acres needs to go through a planning commission city council review. So everyone would see it, be able to comment on it. There's also discussions about having requirements for commercial building size and massing in terms of that commercial site. So we can, as a community, say what makes sense and create a sandbox for that. And then developing design guidelines for everything. So my question is always to people, if we don't like those principles to get us where we want to go, then now's the chance to talk about and amend them because we're adopting a value system. This is all that's happened at the different public hearings. It kind of went through the process I just described, where there was initially transportation angst. We brought in the transportation experts. They resolved the angst, and we just started working through all the issues that started cropping up in the community discussion. Community planning, it's hard when we're talking about things like this to always put it in that 20-year context. We're really talking about full build out to 2041 and not what is today. And so a lot of people really struggle with that. But we need to, when we have these discussions, I want to encourage everybody to think about the fact that one, we're finding a balance of serving our whole community. So that's 34,000 people, not just me and my friends. And two, that's gonna grow to 45,000 people. So how do we think about that? In terms of public testimony, actually, I'm gonna skip that slide because I don't think that's that important. We have received a lot of public testimony. We've received a lot of testimony. I think it's about half and half in terms of people who live in McMinnville and people who live outside of McMinnville. And what's next? So City Council needs to make a decision. It sounds like it's really coming down to this commercial site in terms of where people are focusing. And so to me, it's going to be a policy decision for City Council. Transportation isn't an issue. We can't find a basis saying it doesn't meet state standards. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion about whether that site is needed for our community moving forward to support McMinnville currently and in the future. And if it is needed, what kind of commercial? Is it just commercial for the residential neighborhoods out there with a grocery store, or is it larger commercial to serve the whole community to help capture that retail leakage? Or is it just amenities for the Innovation Center? And all those discussions are underway. And what we're trying to do is get out and talk to people and say, what do you think? City Council's hearing a lot from Friends of Yamhill County because they sent out a call of action to their membership, which is good, and they're participating. But we also want to sort of say, we want to get out broader to the community, say, what do you think is about this? So I say, talk with your neighbors. I know there's neighbors talking about this now. Communicate to City Council. This is what we call legislative land use process. You can talk to City Council about it. You can send in written testimony for the public record. So that means it goes into the public hearing process and it gets sent to all council members. And you can participate in the public hearing. It's been extended to July 26th at 7 p.m. And you can participate in that. And if you have questions, seek out the information. Do things like what the chamber's doing, which is get some information to you and your friends and really, have a good dialogue about it. We have 2 sites that have project documents on it, all the project documents you'd ever want to find about this. And then written testimony you can send to me or you can send to our city recorder. It will get to the same place, which is City Council, which is what's important. And my last thoughts are, as we have this discussion, let's be civil and courteous. It didn't start out that way, and it's been hard because a lot of people put a lot of hard work and volunteer their time into developing this plan, and that was our neighbors and colleagues. And they're now communicating with me saying, I'm not feeling good about what's being said, and I'm worried they won't participate in the future. And then be thoughtful about what's best for the community, both now and into the future. We're looking for constructive solution building. So I always go through all the testimony looking for, okay, what are some good solutions that people are bringing to the table that we can bring to City Council for this? So sorry I went so long. I don't know if we still have time for comments or questions, Joya.
I think I was just asking the questions as they were coming along. So my God, Heather, you always do such a great job in your presentations. Really appreciate that. The information is always so spot on and well researched and presented, and we appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there are any questions. I asked them as they were coming along. Folks can get in touch with you. This is recorded, so we will be posting it on the chamber website, and contact Heather or get in touch with me. I'm happy to talk about it and put you in touch with other folks as well. I'm going to stop the recording now. Have a wonderful day.